So hi guys, I'm really excited to be here. I love your startup ideas. This is awesome. I want to kind of go over Lean Startup 101. I sort of went through like a whole bunch of presentations that I've done and just pulled in what I thought like were like the most interesting slides. So this is going to be like a lot of information that I'm throwing at you. But feel free to ask questions if you have any. So Eric Ries is the creator of the Lean Startup methodology. And he says that considering the incredible amount of human energy, passion, and creativity that we invest in creating new products and services, it's a terrible waste that so many of them fail. And so what you're looking at here is like a list of, or a bunch of the Web 2.0 startups that were supposed to be really big and a bunch failed. But even going beyond internet startups, the stats are that 9 out of 10 new products fail. And that's really huge, so I will repeat it. 9 out of 10 new products fail. And so what Eric Ries says is that most startups fail not because the technology doesn't work, not because we couldn't like figure out how to make the product work, but because we're making something that there's not a real market for. And so what's really interesting is John Sull did this survey to figure out what startup behavior, like what big action that startups take, is the single biggest predictor of failure. So does anyone want to take a guess what that might be? Yeah.
They don't talk to customers?
They don't, that's a very good one. They don't talk to customers. Yeah.
They don't have any startup money?
They don't have any startup money. Okay.
But they're building the product for service for.
So what would be an action that they take?
So instead of like building something specifically for yourself.
Oh right, they're not building it for anybody else. Okay, yes. This is all like in the right direction. Yeah.
They can't get the team interested in the product.
They can't get the team interested in the product. That's another good one. Oh wow, yeah.
Lack of research?
Lack of research.
Not like fulfilling a need.
Not filling a need. Yes, these are all like pointing at the right thing. Did someone else? Okay.
They wouldn't use them themselves?
They wouldn't use them themselves. Wow, okay, yeah. If you guys are doing a startup and it's something that you want to do yourself, just stop. Okay, so a lot of you guys were on the right track and it basically results in this. So the single biggest predictor of failure is sticking to the initial business plan, which is crazy, right? And so if you're not talking to users and getting feedback like and doing research like people talk about, and you're just blindly going forward with whatever your like initial idea was, chances are you're gonna fail. And this is really scary, right? Because when we think about, whenever we're doing something, we think about how do we know that we're on track and how do we know like we're moving towards success? Well, we think about, well, this is our plan and how are we executing against it, right? And so if in a startup, doing just that, if saying this is my plan and I'm gonna stick to it leads to failure, then what is it that you're doing? How do you even know if you're on the right track? And so startups are very exploratory and they're all about talking to customers and doing research and figuring out what works and iterating. And so it can be really scary. And so Eric Ries's promise of the Lean Startup is that instead of building our startups according to myths or guesses, then we can actually guide them with facts and knowledge. So the thing that you want to keep in mind is that startups aren't just small versions of large organizations. So we can't operate the same way we think about big companies operating. Because big companies are already operating in a known market and they're solving a known problem. So they can just focus on better ways to execute, better ways to build the product, better ways to reach the customers. But at a startup, we're starting from nothing, right? We haven't even validated that there's a need for this fabulous idea of ours yet. And so startups are all about learning and discovery rather than execution. And so we have to really change our mindset when we're doing a startup, especially in the early days that you guys are at, that our unit of progress, like when we're figuring out if we're on track for being successful or not, is not execution, it's learning. Or another way to put this is that we really need to validate whether we've got a viable business or not before we go off and build the business. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time. So one way you can think of it is what we're trying to do with Lean Startup is to identify where our big vision of how we're going to change the world intersects with what reality can actually accommodate. So a really good example of this is a startup you might have heard of called The Point. And their idea or big vision was that they wanted to harness the collective power of all of the people on the internet for group action. So whether you're making money, organizing people, or trying to influence change, if you can't do it alone, you can do it on The Point. And this is like a pretty cool vision, like, right? It's like very change the world. But the problem was it was very unfocused. People didn't know what to use it for. You could use it for anything from political activism to boycotting multinational corporations to, I don't know, getting people together for a group discount at pizzeria, right? And so it wasn't gaining traction. They had to lay off one of the co-founders, and it was about to become one of these 9 out of 10 statistics. But the CEO kind of stepped back and said, okay, is there anything about this vision that is working? And actually, that getting people together for a group discount at pizza was working. And if that sounds familiar, and it should, because that CEO was Andrew Mason, and he turned it into Groupon, which became the fastest growing company ever. So I want to play, hopefully I can get my video to work here. I want to play a really short clip. It's just 1 minute. It's Andrew Mason standing up at the New York Tech Meetup, which is like this big, huge, they have like 600 or 700 people come every month, startup meetup in New York, to talk about kind of what he learned from this experience, because I think it sums up really nicely what we're trying to do with Lean Startup. So let's see.
The biggest mistake we made with the point was being kind of completely encumbered by this vision of what I wanted it to be, and taking 10 months to build the product and making all these assumptions about what people would want, that we then spent the next 10 months backtracking on, instead of focusing on the one little piece of the product that people actually liked. So if there was any advice I'd have, it's you're way too dumb to figure out whether your idea is good. It's up to the masses. So build that very small thing and get it out there and keep on trying different things, and eventually you'll get it right. And then
So unfortunately, I gave away a little bit of the punchline with my poor PowerPoint skills here. But if there's one thing that you take away from today, like if you fall asleep after this slide, this is what I want you to remember. You're way too dumb to figure out whether your idea is good or not. So don't get so encumbered by your vision that you go off and spend 10 months building something that nobody wants. Build that very small thing, get it out there, give it to the masses for feedback, and keep trying new things, and eventually you will get it right. So, going back to this, startups are not like big companies. When we kind of have this mental model in our heads of how a company operates, and it's kind of, okay, I have this vision of what I want to build, right? And I go off and build it. But if you try to do that in a startup where you haven't taken the time to validate that there's a need for this idea yet, this approach tends to lead to 9 out of 10 new products failing, which is bad, right? We want to avoid that. And so instead, we want to think about, okay, how can we identify where our vision intersects with reality? And so it's very much about exploring and discovery. And in Lean Startup, we call this the build, measure, learn loop. And so the way to think about it is we start with these assumptions about how this business is going to work. And so I have this assumption that if I build a platform for group action, people will use it for worthy causes like political activism, right? That was the Points idea. And so then we ask ourselves, okay, what could we build in order to learn whether that assumption is correct or not? So, okay, I could go off and actually build the platform for group action, right? And then I could put some analytics on it and see how people actually use it. And that's one way to learn if my assumption is correct or not. But the problem with that, which is what Andrew Mason found, is that taking 10 months to do that, only to learn after 10 months of time and resources that you were wrong, that's like way too expensive. You don't have, like nobody wants to spend that time doing that, and you probably don't have the money to do that. So what you want to think about instead is how can I get through this whole loop as fast as possible? So if you ask the question again, if you say, okay, I have this assumption, which is that, sorry, I can't flip very well. If I have this assumption that if I build a platform for group action, people will use it for worthy causes like political activism. What can I build, or even what can I do to validate if that's true or not in like a couple of days or a week, not in a month, or not in 10 months. So the strategy for doing this is something called minimum viable product. Have you guys heard of this? So kind of what your MVP is. And the idea is to just be very iterative and just what is the smallest thing I can do that's going to take me to the next step. And the thing to remember is that, I know I'm going to keep saying this over and over again, but it's very iterative. It's, putting one thing out there, trying something else. So I'm an agile person, and I like to use words like iterative and incremental. Some people might just call it messy. But, so there isn't like a clean like step 1, step 2, step 3 to what you're gonna do, but I'm gonna do my best to tell you what I think the steps are, and just keep in mind you're always iterating on them. So the biggest problem, I get to work with like hundreds of startups, which is really awesome, and the biggest problem that I see is that startups fail to do this. They fail to find a problem that's actually worth solving, which I'm gonna call step 1A. And what that usually manifests itself is something like this. We had an idea for a product, we went off and built it, put it up on our website, and not a single person clicked through to it. So, what did we learn from that? I don't know, guess at what we learned from that? Yeah.
Your assumptions were wrong.
That's very good. Okay, your assumptions were wrong. Something was wrong in there. It's not very useful because you don't know which one is wrong. But something's wrong. So then the question is, was there a faster way to get through that learning loop? Yeah.
Start with marketing, look for, like, survey people, what are they looking for?
Good. Right, survey, ask people what they're looking for. Did you have a...
Do like a Google AdWords campaign, see if anybody searches for it or clicks for it.
I like that. So that's actually, yes. Both of these are good. It's get out there and start talking to people. So you could survey people, you could do a Google AdWords campaign, and instead of building the product, just put a button to your product on your website, right? And if people click on it, oops, sorry, that's not available yet. If you had some analytics that would show you the count of 0 that clicked through, it would have been just as effective without actually building the product. So a perfectly viable lean startup tactic, and one that I understand you guys are going to be working on later today, is to build a landing page. And so this is just do some Google AdWords or Facebook ads or whatever it is to try to see if there's even enough interest to get people to even come to your page. And then if they come and they like what your idea is, are they actually willing to give you their email address? So that kind of helps you judge if there's some interest in it. So a good example of this is Buffer. Does anyone use Buffer? Oh yeah, great, I love Buffer. So Buffer helps you like queue up your social media tweets and posts and everything. And this is how it looks today, but it's not how it started. So when Buffer started, they just created a landing page to do exactly this. Can we even get people interested enough to come to the page? And this is kind of their minimum feature set. Just choose some times to tweet, add tweets to your Buffer, and we'll do the rest. We'll tweet it out for you. If people are interested, they click plans and pricing. When they click that, this is kind of the oops, we don't have it yet. Give us your email address if you're interested. They tweeted it out. Some people came to the page, left their email address. This was good enough for them. They just wanted like a signal if they were in the right direction or not. And this is important too. Like there's something called vanity metrics. It might feel good to be like, we got 1 million people signed up. But how long is it going to take you to get 1 million people signed up, or 1,000 people, or 100, whatever it is, right? You just want to get an indicator on am I in the right direction or not. So they seem to be getting a good signal that people were interested. So what do you think the next step they took was? Anyone want to take a guess? Yeah.
Like a private beta.
A private beta, okay.
Private beta with minimal features.
With minimal features, okay.
Emailing people.
Emailing people, that's really good. They did not do that, but that's also like a great thing to do is say, okay, why are you interested in this, right? Tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for. So they did not do the beta yet because they wanted to see, okay, people are interested, but are they interested in actually paying for it? Can we make this a viable business? So all they did was they added one page in between. That when they click plans and pricing, they got 3 pricing options. It can be free plan, $5 a month plan, $20 a month plan. Again, kept tweeting it out, people kept coming. Most people did click free, but some people actually clicked the paid plan. So you're like, okay, this is a good indicator that there is some interest, people are even willing to pay for this. So it wasn't enough to go spend 10 months building something, but their first version was really basic, right? It was just queue up some tweets and tweet them out. That was it. They thought they could actually do it in 1 day. And so this seemed like enough evidence for 1 day. The truth is software is always like harder to develop than you think it's going to be, so it took them 7 days, but still it was only 1 week. They built it, they put it out there, and within within a month, they had 500 users signed up. So what was really awesome about this is they're already bringing in some revenue as they're building out their product, even though it's like a really early version of it. And they got real users using it, so whoever said email the users for feedback, they can be talking to these users and seeing how they're using it, so they can evolve the product and create it based on how real users are using it and what they need out of it, which is really invaluable. And you don't get that if you just kind of go heads down and don't talk to people and go off the build. So step number 1B, because you kind of do it at the same time, is you also, in addition to finding a problem that resonates, you have to know who your customer is. So this is sort of what the lean startup looks like, the model, and the idea is you've got agile development, which shows you how to iteratively develop your product, along with something called customer development, which is how to iteratively develop your customers. And the thing to keep in mind here is with a startup, it's just as important to develop your customers as it is to develop your product. Okay. So I wanted to give an example of something I've seen. I almost pulled up a business model canvas. Have you guys seen business model canvas? Okay, it's a really good tool. I didn't have time to get into it today, but you should take a look at it. But the idea is to kind of get like a one-pager on what your business looks like. But the truth is that the things that you're starting with are, who's my customer, what problem am I solving for them? And like I said, I talked to hundreds of startups, and a really big thing that I see is something like, say a startup is doing a recipe app, which, and there's a lot of food ideas in here, but if you're a recipe app in here, I might say, okay, you're doing a recipe app, that's great. Who is your customer? And they'll say, well, it's a recipe app, so my customer is anyone who cooks. That's really broad, right? But they'll say, well, I want to have as many users as possible, right? Because more users means more successful business, and that's really good. So I'll say, okay, then what problem is it that you're solving for anyone who cooks? Can't find recipes. So I don't know, how many people in here don't know how to find recipes? Yeah, right? The problem with going after something that's so broad, like it feels good, it feels like you can get a ton of users, is it's kind of like if you try to be that person that everybody likes, right? You're just like kind of boring, right? And it's mediocre and there's not that much interest, it's not that compelling. So I would not go for this. There was actually some interesting things, like, was it you who did the cooking idea? The food truck. Okay, so yeah, anyway, there were some good ideas that I heard around food in here that were much more specific than anyone who cooks, so that was good. A couple ways to hone in on the problem if you're thinking about this. One is to start with who's the customer, because chances are if you're doing something around recipes or you're doing something around food, there's a reason. You're probably passionate about that, right? And there's probably certain people who are kind of like your people, right? They're like the people that you're really interested in helping, and it probably isn't like any Joe Schmo who cooks, mac and cheese on his stove sometimes. So think about who your people are. Who are you really excited about helping? And so maybe your people are people who really love to cook. They're not like chefs or anything. They don't do it professionally, so I'll call them amateur gourmet chefs. And maybe what they really love to do more than anything is just to make fabulous food for their friends and family. So is there a problem there? I don't know, but you can go out and start talking to them and seeing if there's some problems that they have around that. Maybe like finding ingredients or finding certain kinds of recipes that are very specific to what they're looking for. Another way you can attack this is to really focus on the problem side first. And so when I think about, okay, what's like a problem around recipes and food, like it seems like everybody, and well, I heard a lot of people talking about startups to help people be healthy, or startups to help people lose weight, right? That's like everybody's always on a diet, right? So you might go after a big problem that you know about. People need to lose weight. So who's your customer? Well, your customer's dieters. But if everybody needs to lose weight, then saying dieters is kind of like saying anyone who cooks, right? It's not very compelling. So again, like try to hone in on like a specific area. So maybe for you guys, it's diet. Oh, gosh.
Matt, seriously.
That was awesome, and that's it. Did you get all of that?
Computer's freaking What is wrong with your computer, so? Good. That one was like.
Would you guys personally be the drivers?
Okay.
You're probably surgeon hired.
So maybe you're anxious dieters in college, or people who need to diet with dealing with dining halls, or like the grocery store collection around campus. The thing that you want to just keep in mind as you're thinking about who's my customer and what problem I'm solving is you're looking to find a painkiller, not a vitamin. And I don't know who this guy is, I just thought it was funny when I Googled image search on painkiller, that's what I got. But you wanna find like a really serious pain point, because when people use a startup's product, they're taking a risk. This is like a company they've never heard of, a product they've never heard of. They're not gonna use it just because it's like, oh, that's nice to have, right? But if they have like a really big problem, pain point, that you're helping them solve, then they're much more likely to kind of be an early adopter and help you refine the product. So how do you kind of figure this out? How do you get to that pain point, that problem that you're trying to solve? You need to get outside the building. So have you guys heard of Steve Blank or 4 Steps to the Epiphany? Okay, so some people. So I kind of flashed by it really quickly, but in that diagram where I had customer development, Steve Blank is a professor at Stanford who came up with this model for how do you develop your customers. And he likes to say no facts live inside the building, only guesses. So you might kind of imagine like the stereotypical 2 guys in a garage. I've got an idea, I'm going to go build it. And they go build it. They're just guessing what people want. So you need to get out and talk to people. And when you do this, it's called customer discovery. So let's say your vision is to build flying cars. When I created this slide, I had like an engineering friend kind of looking over my shoulder. He said, I don't think that would work. I think that the roof would fall off. But the idea with customer discovery is kind of discovering who your customers are. So what is the problem? Maybe if I'm doing flying cars, I'm trying to solve the problem that commuting sucks, right? So who has the problem? Well, maybe people who live outside the city but work or go to school inside the city, so they have to commute in through like the worst traffic. Maybe that's who has the worst problem, and that's who I'm going to be targeting. So okay, get out and talk to those people and say, how important is this problem solution to the customer? So if the FAA says, yes, it's cool, you can make a flying car, but you have to go to an airport to take off, then that would mean that people would have to get in their non-flying cars and drive through like the worst traffic to the core of the city to get in their flying cars. That really doesn't solve the problem. So it doesn't mean that you throw your whole startup out, it just means you need to pivot. Or think about, okay, maybe I'm solving a different problem. Maybe I have a different customer I'm going after. So maybe it's like really rich people who want more toys, right? And they don't care that they have to fly to an airport because they do that always anyway. But let's say FAA says, no, it's cool. You can actually take off in your flying car right from your driveway. So you can go after those people who commuting sucks for. Then you have to ask, how valuable is this problem solution to the customer? So if this is going to cost people $1 million to buy, but people are only willing to pay $500,000 for it, then you have a problem. Again, it doesn't mean you throw the startup out. It means you have to rethink things. So maybe you relook at your design and see if there's something you can do that's less expensive. So step number 2, which I've already started to get into here, is you need to find a solution that's going to resonate with the customer. So this is another thing that I see a lot with startups. Is they're like, oh, there's this problem, and I'm going to solve it for them in a way that is totally not useful to them. So, like, there's a billion photo sharing apps, right? Like, I see like a lot of, and I don't think anyone in here did that either, which is good. People say, well, we're all at an event together, and everyone's taking pictures, and we want to, be able to see all the pictures from the events. But the app is, or the startup is like creating an app that you have to download in some website that nobody uses, none of your friends are connected to or anything, that you have to go to look at the pictures. It's just not interesting. So yes, it solves the problem, but not in a way that's helpful to the users. So you want to really figure out, before you go off and build the product, what's a solution that's going to resonate? So something that I really like, a technique I really like for doing this is called concierge service. It's sometimes called the Wizard of Oz approach for man behind the curtain. And the idea is that instead of actually building the software or the technology for it, you do it manually. And you see if it's going to work or not. So a good example is Aardvark. They did social search. So the idea is that there's some questions you really need to ask a person, not a search engine for. So I don't know, like, what's the best professor at Northeastern for a certain topic? You really don't ask a person that. So how would you build that? I don't know, but let's put up a web page and let people ask the questions and see if anyone asks before we worry about how to build it. So that's what they did. They put up a website. You can ask a question. It would email like the founder, who would then go find an expert, so like a Northeastern student, ask them the question, and email it back. Pretty ghetto, but it worked. By the time they got to the point where they couldn't scale at this because they were getting so many people asking questions, and they're like, okay, we've got a business, now we can go build the technology. It does seem ghetto, but Google acquired them for, I want to say, like $50 million. So that worked. The other thing that makes me nervous about this is I think, well, if I can't scale anymore, then I have to be able to turn on the product like the very next day, and I haven't started coding it yet. But it took them like a year to build out the product, so I don't know all the details. I'm guessing they did it very incrementally, probably starting with like the most manually intensive parts first. You can also, that actually had like a little bit of a technology front on it, like a website. It doesn't even have to have any technology involved in it at all. So do you guys know GetAround? It's where you can actually rent your car to, like rent your own car to other people. They weren't sure if this was gonna work. Like, are people gonna be willing to give their keys to strangers? And so they didn't build any technology for it at all to start with. They went to a certain area. It was actually like a small university that had like 100 students and faculty and professors, and just put the program into place. And just to see, are people gonna lend their cars to strangers or lend their keys to strangers? And no technology at all. It worked. And so then they went ahead and built the technology with things like you can unlock the car from your cell phone and a website where you can find cars and all of that. But so there's a lot that you can do just talking to people. Okay. Oh, I don't know the time because we restarted it. Hopefully I'm okay. Another example is, let's say we go back to that problem of, you're trying to help dieters in college who need to lose weight, right? You can actually sit down with someone, like side by side, like maybe go through the dining hall with them or wherever it is they get their food, and say, you tell me what you like, and I'm gonna create a meal plan for you just on paper, right? And see if people are willing to pay you for that. If they're not willing to pay you for this like totally customized service that you're doing one-on-one with them, the chances are they're not gonna be willing to pay for an app that would be less personalized for it. And the advantage to actually sitting down with users and doing this manually is that you really get to understand what it is they're looking for and what works and what doesn't, so that when you do build it, you know exactly what's going to resonate. And then you just keep iterating and you just keep trying different things. So don't get frustrated, it takes a while. But the question is then, okay, how do you know when you're ready to actually build that product and put out your first release? So that would be called customer validation, and that's when they're actually giving you money. So Buffer was a good example of that. They don't have to actually give you money. They can, if they take some action that they think they're giving you money, like when they clicked through the plans and pricing, you remember that? And they said, well, I'm willing to give you $5. Another thing you could do, especially for any like non-software startups and things that are more like hardware and engineering technology, you could do a Kickstarter and see if people will actually basically pre-order it. And willing to pay that way. But you really want to make sure that people are going to give you money for this, otherwise it's not worth your time to go build it. And then, when you get that, then it's time to launch. When you launch again, you don't want to like go build the 10-month long thing. You want to build something, Paul Graham says it has a quantum of utility. And the idea here is, and I'm just going to check my notes for his quote. He says, what you want to build is, or what you want to release when you've built something sufficiently better than existing options that at least some users would say, I'm glad this appeared because now I can finally do X. So some people think MVP means shitty product. Like I had somebody ask me that the other day. It doesn't really. It can be like a very minimal version of a product, but it still needs to be better than the options out there. Otherwise, why are they going to go use you? And that is what I've got. Hopefully that was okay on time. I have no idea.